Russell Wright's fingers glide across Pia's blue skin, eliciting a shudder of pleasure that threatens to unravel years of interstellar diplomacy. The human diplomat, stationed on the alien world of Teleria, finds himself at the center of a cultural storm during a formal reception in the High Council chambers. The event, meant to celebrate the recent Earth-Teleria trade agreement, pulses with the potential of advanced space propulsion technology. Rare minerals, crucial to humanity's cosmic ambitions, lie just within reach. But now, as Russell's hands work their magic on Pia's arm, that future hangs in the balance. Pia, daughter of the Telerian High Counselor and junior diplomat herself, stands frozen. Her large, captivating eyes widen with each new sensation. The iridescent blue of her skin seems to shimmer more intensely under Russell's touch. "What is this technique?" Pia asks, her voice a mix of curiosity and barely concealed excitement. Russell pauses, suddenly aware of the weight of the moment. "It's called a massage," he explains, his voice low. "It's a common practice among humans for relaxation and pleasure." Pia's eyes dart around the opulent reception hall. The crystalline structures that make up the High Council chambers catch the light, casting prismatic patterns across the gathered dignitaries. "Can you show me more?" she asks, leading Russell to a secluded alcove. As Russell's skilled hands begin to work, Pia's alien physiology responds in ways neither of them anticipated. Her breath quickens, her skin flushes a deeper blue. Unbeknownst to the pair, Pia's father watches from across the room, his face contorting with growing rage. The Telerian High Counselor storms towards them, his ornate robes billowing behind him. "What is the meaning of this?" he thunders, causing nearby conversations to halt abruptly. Russell steps back, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Sir, I can explain." "Silence, human!" the counselor spits. "You dare violate our most sacred taboos? The trade agreement is canceled." A ripple of shock passes through the assembled diplomats. Earth's representatives exchange panicked glances, knowing full well what this means for humanity's technological future. Pia stands torn between two worlds. The lingering warmth of Russell's touch conflicts with a lifetime of cultural conditioning. She opens her mouth to speak, then closes it, unsure of what to say. As accusations fly and demands for Russell's expulsion grow louder, the human diplomat realizes the gravity of his mistake. He's jeopardized not only his own career, but potentially the future of human space exploration. Russell locks eyes with Pia, seeing in her conflicted gaze a mirror of his own turmoil. In that moment, he knows that whatever happens next will shape the course of two civilizations. With the fate of humanity's cosmic ambitions hanging in the balance, Russell takes a deep breath and prepares to navigate the most challenging diplomatic crisis of his career. As accusations and demands for Russell's expulsion continue to fill the air, Ambassador Sarah Chin's voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Wright, my office, now." Russell cast one last glance at Pia, her conflicted expression searing into his memory, before following the ambassador out of the reception hall. The crystalline walls seemed to close in around him as they walked in tense silence to the Earth Embassy. Once inside a secure conference room, Ambassador Chen fixed Russell with a resolute expression. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she asked, her voice low and controlled. Russell swallowed hard. "Ambassador, Save it," she cut him off. "The Telerians are demanding your immediate deportation. If we don't find a solution in the next 48 hours, we can kiss that trade agreement goodbye." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "And with it, our access to the rare minerals we need for our space program." Russell's mind raced. The fate of humanity's cosmic ambitions rested on his shoulders. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I'd like to request a formal audience with the Telerian High Counselor," he said. Ambassador Chen raised an eyebrow. "Bold move, right? But it might be our only shot. I'll make it happen." Hours later, Russell found himself face-to-face with Imminent, Pia's father, and the Telerian High Counselor. The alien's piercing gaze bore into Russell as he spoke. "You dare to request an audience after your blatant disrespect of our customs?" Imminent's voice reverberated through the chamber. Russell steeled himself. "High Counselor, I come before you to propose a solution, a cultural exchange program designed to bridge the gap between our peoples. Zianek's eyes narrowed. Explain. I would personally oversee the program, working closely with your daughter to ensure mutual understanding and respect between our cultures. Russell continued, his heart pounding. A tense silence filled the room as Zianek considered the proposal. Finally, he spoke. Very well, human, but there will be conditions. Russell nodded, relief washing over him. You will undergo a rigorous Talarian etiquette course, Zianek declared, and all interactions with my daughter will be supervised by a chaperone of my choosing. Agreed, Russell said without hesitation. Zianek gestured to a stern-looking Talarian male. This is Coldron, my most trusted advisor. He will oversee the cultural exchange and report directly to me. As Russell left the chamber, his mind whirled with the implications of what he'd just agreed to. He was so lost in thought that he nearly collided with Dr. Alara Voss, the human xenobiologist stationed on Talaria. Mr. Wright, she said, steadying him, I heard about what happened at the reception. I'd like to offer my assistance. Russell looked at her, curious. How so? I can help you understand Talarian biology and social cues, Dr. Voss explained. It could be invaluable in preventing further misunderstandings. Russell nodded gratefully. I'd appreciate that, Doctor. Days later, Russell found himself in a lush botanical garden, surrounded by a vibrant mix of earth and Talarian flora. Pia stood beside him, her blue skin shimmering in the dappled sunlight. Coldron loomed nearby, his watchful gaze never wavering. On Earth, Russell began, careful to maintain a respectful distance, physical contact is often used as a form of greeting or to show affection between friends. Pia's large eyes widened with interest. Fascinating. On Talaria, such contact is reserved for the most intimate of relationships. As they walked through the garden, Russell noticed Pia's gaze lingering on a patch of earth roses. Without thinking, he reached out and plucked one, offering it to her. In human culture, we sometimes give flowers as gifts, he explained, his voice soft. Pia hesitated for a moment before reaching out to accept the rose. As their fingers brushed, Russell felt that same electric connection from the night of the reception, even stronger now. Pia's skin seemed to pulse with a soft blue light. Coldron cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. Russell quickly pulled his hand back, but not before noticing the mix of curiosity and excitement in Pia's eyes. As they continued their walk, Russell's mind raced. He knew he was treading a dangerous line. The trade agreement, Earth's future in space, his own career, all hung in the balance. But as he glanced at Pia, watching her examine the rose with wonder, he couldn't help but feel that something even more important was at stake. The botanical garden's paths twisted and turned, much like the complex situation Russell found himself navigating. He knew that bridging the gap between human and Talarian customs would require all of his diplomatic skills, and then some. As Coldron's watchful eyes followed their every move, Russell realized that exploring his growing feelings for Pia would be an even greater challenge. As the first official meeting of the cultural exchange program drew to a close, Russell found himself both exhilarated and exhausted. The path ahead was fraught with potential missteps, but he was determined to find a way forward. With Pia by his side and the watchful Coldron never far behind, Russell prepared himself for the diplomatic challenge of a lifetime. As Russell prepared himself for the diplomatic challenge of a lifetime, he knew that understanding Talarian customs and biology would be crucial to his success. He threw himself into intensive study sessions with Dr. Alara Voss, the human xenobiologist stationed on Talaria. The key to Talarian physiology lies in their neural pathways, Dr. Voss explained during one of their late-night sessions. She pulled up a holographic display of Talarian anatomy, highlighting the intricate network of nerves running through their arms and hands. Their nerve endings in these areas are incredibly sensitive, far more so than humans. Russell leaned in, his eyes widening as he processed the information. That explains Pia's reaction to the massage, he murmured, pieces of the puzzle falling into place. Dr. Voss nodded. Exactly. What might be a simple touch for us could be an overwhelming sensory experience for a Talarian. As Russell delved deeper into Talarian biology, Pia embarked on her own journey of discovery. She pored over human cultural databases, fascinated by the concept of romance and physical affection. The more she learned, the more she questioned the strict physical boundaries imposed by her own society. Their next cultural exchange meeting took place in the Tellurian National Art Museum, a towering structure of crystalline spires and flowing organic shapes. Russell, Pia, and Coldron stood before an exhibit showcasing sculptures created through a unique Tellurian art form. These pieces are shaped using a series of precise hand movements, Pia explained, her eyes shining with enthusiasm. The artist channels their emotions through their touch, allowing the crystal to take form. Russell studied the intricate sculptures, an idea forming in his mind. It sounds fascinating. Would it be possible to see a demonstration? Coldron's eyes narrowed, but he nodded slowly. I suppose that would be acceptable, as long as I observe. Pia guided them to a workstation where a small piece of malleable Tellurian crystal awaited. She began to explain the process, her hands hovering over the crystal without touching it. May I? Russell asked, gesturing towards the crystal. Pia hesitated for a moment before nodding. Of course, it's important for you to experience our art firsthand. As Russell's hands met the crystal, Pia placed her hands over his, guiding his movements. The moment their skin made contact, a jolt of electricity seemed to pass between them. Pia's breath caught in her throat as waves of pleasure radiated from her hands, up her arms. Russell felt the change immediately. Pia's skin began to shimmer, patterns of bioluminescence dancing across her blue surface. He marveled at the sight, his own heart racing at the intensity of their connection. Coldron's voice cut through the moment like a knife. Enough, he barked, stepping forward to separate them. This demonstration is over. As Coldron ushered them out of the museum, Russell caught a glimpse of Pia's face. Her eyes were wide, a mix of confusion and longing evident in her expression. The next day, Russell found himself once again in the presence of Zianek, the Tellurian High Counselor. The alien leader's face was a mask of barely suppressed fury. You have gone too far, human, Zianek growled. Your actions at the museum were a deliberate exploitation of our physiology. Russell took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation. High Counselor, I assure you that was not my intent. I've been studying Tellurian biology, trying to better understand your people. Zianek's eyes narrowed. Explain. Russell launched into a detailed explanation of what he had learned from Dr. Voss, describing the sensitivity of Tellurian nerve endings and the potential for positive interactions between their species. As he spoke, Zianek's expression shifted from anger to curiosity. When Russell finished, the High Counselor was silent for a long moment. Your knowledge is impressive, Zianek admitted grudgingly. But knowledge alone does not justify your actions. Then let me prove it, Russell said, seizing the opportunity. Allow me to demonstrate that human-Tellurian physical interactions can be beneficial rather than harmful. Zianek considered the proposal, his long fingers steepled before him. Very well, human. I will give you one chance to prove your theory. But know this, if you fail, you will be immediately deported, and the trade agreement will be nullified. Russell nodded, understanding the weight of the challenge before him. As he left Zianek's chambers, his mind was already racing with ideas. He needed to design a series of experiments that would showcase the potential benefits of human Tellurian touch, and he knew just who to ask for help. Dr. Voss listened intently as Russell explained the situation. It's a risky proposition, she said, but it could be groundbreaking if we succeed. Together, they began to develop a program that combined elements of human massage techniques with Tellurian pressure point therapy. Their goal was to create a series of controlled experiments that would demonstrate the physical and emotional benefits of interspecies contact. As word of the challenge spread, Russell found himself at the center of a growing controversy. Opinions among both humans and Tellurians were sharply divided. Some saw it as an opportunity for greater understanding, while others feared it would lead to the erosion of Tellurian cultural values. Tensions rose within the Earth Embassy as well. Ambassador Chen called Russell into her office, her face grave. Right, I hope you understand what's at stake here. If this goes wrong, we're not just risking the trade agreement. We could be setting back human-Tellurian relations by decades. Russell nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. I understand, Ambassador. but I believe this is our best chance to bridge the gap between our cultures. As he left the embassy, Russell was surprised to find Pia waiting for him. Her eyes met his, filled with commitment. "I want to volunteer for your experiments," she said, her voice steady despite the slight shimmer of her skin betraying her nervousness. Russell's heart raced at her words, but he forced himself to remain calm. "Are you sure? The risks—" "I'm sure," Pia interrupted. "As a junior diplomat, it's my duty to help foster understanding between our people. And—" she hesitated, her skin flushing a deeper blue. "I want to understand these sensations, to explore this connection between us." As Russell looked into Pia's eyes, he knew that the coming days would test not only his diplomatic skills, but also his ability to control his growing feelings for her. With the fate of human-Talarian relations hanging in the balance, they were about to embark on a journey that would challenge the boundaries between their species and potentially reshape the future of interstellar diplomacy. Relations hanging in the balance, they were about to embark on a journey that would challenge the boundaries between their species and potentially reshape the future of interstellar diplomacy. The next morning, Russell arrived at the specially designed laboratory within the Earth Embassy. Dr. Voss was already there, carefully calibrating the advanced monitoring systems that lined the walls. The room hummed with the soft beeps and whirs of cutting-edge technology, a stark contrast to the tension that filled the air. "Are we ready?" Russell asked, his voice tight with anticipation. Dr. Voss nodded, her eyes never leaving the control panel. "As ready as we'll ever be. Remember, we're not just conducting an experiment here. We're potentially redefining interspecies relations." The door slid open and Pia entered, followed closely by Coldron. The Talarian chaperone's eyes darted around the room, his posture rigid with disapproval. "I still believe this is unwise," Coldron growled, his gaze settling on Russell. Pia stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "And I believe it's necessary, Coldron. We can't let fear hold us back from progress." Russell gestured to a padded table in the center of the room. "Shall we begin?" As Pia settled onto the table, Russell could see the slight tremor in her hands, the rapid pulse visible in her neck. He took a deep breath, centering himself before beginning the carefully choreographed routine he and Dr. Voss had developed. Starting with Pia's arm, Russell began gentle, sweeping motions. Almost immediately, Pia's skin began to shimmer, bioluminescent patterns dancing across her blue surface. The monitoring equipment beeped softly, recording the changes in her physiology. "Remarkable," Dr. Voss murmured, her eyes flicking between Pia and the readouts. "Her stress hormones are already dropping significantly." As Russell progressed to more advanced techniques, focusing on the Talarian pressure points Dr. Voss had identified, Pia's reactions intensified. Soft sighs escaped her lips, her body arching slightly into Russell's touch. Coldron shifted uncomfortably, taking a step forward. "This is inappropriate," he began, but Dr. Voss cut him off. "On the contrary," she said, gesturing to the monitors, "these reactions are entirely normal and extremely beneficial. Look at her endorphin levels." Russell tried to focus on the task at hand, but he couldn't ignore the growing warmth in his chest, the way his skin tingled where it contacted Pia's. He worked his way up her arm, his fingers finding a particularly sensitive spot near her shoulder. Pia let out a sound somewhere between a gasp and a moan, her entire body shuddering with pleasure. The monitors began beeping more insistently, and Russell noticed a change in the air, a sweet, intoxicating scent that made his head swim. "Russell, step back," Dr. Voss commanded sharply, her eyes wide as she stared at his readouts. He complied, stumbling slightly as he moved away from Pia. His heart was racing, and he felt flushed, overwhelmed by a sudden intense attraction to Pia that went beyond anything he'd experienced before. Dr. Voss quickly ended the session, helping Pia sit up while keeping a wary eye on Russell. "It seems we've encountered an unexpected complication," she said, her voice carefully neutral. Coldron looked ready to explode, his massive frame trembling with hardly restrained anger. "What have you done to her?" he demanded. "Not them," Dr. Voss corrected, her scientific curiosity overtaking her concern. "Her. Pia's body appears to be secreting some kind of pheromone-like substance. It's affecting Russell's physiology." Pia's eyes widened, her gaze locking with Russell's. The air between them seemed to crackle with energy. I've never felt anything like this before, she whispered. Before anyone could respond, the lab door burst open. Zia Nek strode in, his face a mask of fury and concern. "What is the meaning of this?" he thundered. As Dr. Voss hurried to explain the situation, Russell found himself struggling to focus. The lingering effects of Pia's pheromones clouded his thoughts, making it difficult to think of anything but her. Zia Nek listened to Dr. Voss's explanation, his expression shifting from anger to disbelief to a grudging curiosity. This pheromone response, it's unknown in our medical literature? Completely, Dr. Voss confirmed. I believe it may be a natural response that's been suppressed due to your cultural taboos surrounding physical contact. The High Counselor was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving between Pia and Russell. Finally, he spoke. The experiments may continue, but with stricter oversight, and I want a Talarian scientist involved. As Zia Nek swept out of the room, followed closely by Cole Drone, Russell felt a mix of relief and apprehension. They had been given a chance to continue their work, but at what cost? Dr. Voss was already at her computer, sending messages. I know just the person, she said. Dr. Zinlor, a brilliant Talarian biochemist. With his help, we can study this pheromone effect more closely. Russell nodded, still feeling slightly dazed. As he turned to leave, he caught Pia's eye. The look they shared was filled with confusion, excitement, and a hint of fear at the unknown path stretching before them. As Russell stepped out of the lab, he was immediately confronted by Ambassador Chen. Her face was drawn with worry. Right, we need to talk, she said, her voice low and urgent. Word of what happened in there is already spreading. We need to get ahead of this before it spirals out of control. Russell nodded, steeling himself for the challenges ahead. He knew that the real work was just beginning, and the delicate balance between scientific discovery, diplomatic relations, and personal feelings would be put to the test in ways he could never have imagined. Russell's head was still spinning from the intensity of his encounter with Pia when a commotion outside the laboratory caught his attention. He rushed to the window, his eyes widening at the sight below. A massive crowd had gathered, their angry shouts echoing through the corridors of the research complex. At the forefront stood Vorkax, a notorious anti-human activist, his voice rising above the din as he rallied the protesters. This is an outrage, Vorkax bellowed, his voice amplified by some unseen device. These humans seek to corrupt our very biology. Russell turned to Dr. Voss, his face grim. We need to evacuate, now. As if in response to his words, the building shook with the force of an impact. The protesters had begun to throw objects at the walls, their fury escalating rapidly. Dr. Zinlor, the Talarian biochemist who had just joined their team, looked up from his console, his expression a mixture of fear and grit. We can't leave yet. The data from our latest experiments, it's too valuable to lose. Russell nodded, his mind racing. All right, we need a plan. Dr. Voss, Dr. Zinlor, start transferring all our data to secure servers. Destroy any physical evidence we can't take with us. As the scientists sprang into action, Russell turned to Pia. Can you help secure the lab? Your knowledge of Talarian security protocols could buy us some time. Pia nodded, her skin shimmering with a mix of fear and excitement. She moved to a nearby console, her fingers flying over the controls as she activated a series of defensive measures. Russell pulled out his communicator, quickly establishing a connection with Ambassador Chen. Ambassador, we need an emergency extraction team. The situation here has become volatile. Chen's voice crackled through the device, tight with concern. Understood, right? I'm dispatching a team now. Hold tight. As Russell ended the call, he heard a loud crash from outside. The protesters had breached the outer perimeter. Time was running out. Suddenly, an idea struck him. It was risky, potentially dangerous, but it might be their only chance. He turned to the others, his voice urgent. I have a plan, but it's unconventional. We're going to use the pheromone effect to our advantage. Dr. Voss looked up from her work, her eyes widening as she grasped Russell's meaning. You want to produce enough pheromones to affect the entire crowd? That's never been done before. The physiological strain could be enormous. Russell met Pia's gaze, seeing his own mix of fear and willpower mirrored in her eyes. We don't have a choice. It's our best shot at getting out of here safely. As Dr. Voss and Dr. Zinn-Lore hurriedly set up equipment to amplify and disperse the pheromones, Russell and Pia moved to the center of the room. They stood facing each other, both acutely aware of the gravity of what they were about to attempt. "Are you ready?" Russell asked softly, his hand hovering just above Pia's arm. She nodded, her skin already beginning to shimmer in anticipation. "Let's do this." As Russell's fingers made contact with Pia's skin, the effect was immediate and intense. Waves of pleasure coursed through them, both as they focused on the techniques that had produced the strongest responses in their previous experiments. The air around them grew thick with the sweet, intoxicating scent of the pheromones. Russell felt his head swimming, his entire being focused on the points where his skin met Pia's. He could feel her pulse racing, see the patterns of light dancing across her blue skin. Time seemed to lose all meaning as they continued their intense session of physical contact. Russell was vaguely aware of Dr. Voss calling out readings from her instruments, of Dr. Zinn-Lore making adjustments to the dispersal system, but it all seemed distant, unimportant compared to the overwhelming sensations he was experiencing. Just as Russell felt he couldn't take any more, the door to the laboratory burst open. He stumbled back from Pia, disoriented, to see a team of heavily armed security personnel flooding into the room. At their head was a tall, imposing figure who Russell recognized as Captain Marcus Holt, one of Earth's top security specialists. "We need to move, now," Holt barked, his eyes scanning the room efficiently. Dr. Voss's voice cut through Russell's haze. "The dispersal system is ready. Activating now." A soft hiss filled the air as the pheromones were released into the ventilation system. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then from outside, the angry shouts began to fade, replaced by sounds of confusion. Captain Holt gestured sharply. "This is our window. Move." As they rushed from the laboratory, Russell caught a glimpse of the scene outside. The once furious mob now stood in disarray, their expressions dazed and unfocused. Even Vorkax, who had been leading the charge, now seemed lost and bewildered. The extraction team quickly formed a protective cordon around Russell, Pia, and the scientists, hustling them towards a waiting transport. As they boarded, Russell's eyes met Pia's. In that moment, despite the chaos around them, he felt a profound connection, a shared understanding of the momentous nature of what they had just experienced. As the transport lifted off, leaving the confused crowd behind, Russell knew that nothing would ever be the same. The pheromone effect had proven more powerful than any of them had imagined, and the repercussions of its use would be far-reaching. He glanced at Dr. Voss and Dr. Zinn-Lore, already deep in discussion about the data they had gathered. Their eyes gleamed with the excitement of new discoveries, new possibilities. But as the adrenaline of their escape began to fade, Russell found his thoughts turning to the future. How would both worlds react to what had happened here? And what did it mean for his relationship with Pia, now irrevocably changed by their shared experience? As the transport sped towards a secure location, Russell steeled himself for the challenges ahead. The true test of their discoveries and of human-Talarian relations was only just beginning. The true test of their discoveries and of human-Talarian relations was only just starting to unfold. As the transport touched down at a secure facility on the outskirts of the Talarian capital, Russell felt a mix of relief and apprehension. The events at the laboratory had set in motion a chain of reactions that would undoubtedly reshape the future of both species. Ambassador Chen was waiting for them as they disembarked, her face a mask of professional calm. "Welcome to your new home, for the time being," she said, gesturing to the sprawling complex behind her. "We've set up a joint research center here, in cooperation with the Talarian authorities. It's the safest place for you to continue your work." Russell nodded, his eyes scanning the perimeter. The security measures were evident: high walls, advanced scanning technology, and a mix of human and Talarian guards patrolling the grounds. It was clear that no one was taking any chances after the near disaster at the previous facility. As they were led inside, Russell found himself walking beside Pia. The air between them seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension, the memory of their intense connection during the pheromone dispersal still fresh in both their minds. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, careful not to let the others overhear. Pia's skin shimmered slightly, a sign of her emotional state. "I'm processing," she replied, her voice equally low. "What happened back there, Russell? It was unlike anything I've ever experienced." Before Russell could respond, they were ushered into a large conference room. Dr. Voss and Dr. Zinalor were already there, along with several other scientists from both species. The atmosphere was one of scarcely controlled excitement. "We've been reviewing the data from the incident," Dr. Voss began without preamble, her eyes bright with scientific fervor. "The implications are staggering. The pheromone effect is far more potent than we initially believed." Dr. Zinalor nodded, his typically stoic Talarian features animated with enthusiasm. "We've only scratched the surface of understanding the biological interactions between our species. There's so much more to explore." As the scientists launched into a detailed discussion of their findings and plans for future experiments, Russell found his attention wandering. His gaze kept drifting to Pia, who seemed equally distracted. There was an unspoken pull between them, a connection that went beyond the professional boundaries of their roles. Over the next few weeks, as the research progressed, Russell and Pia found themselves spending more time together outside of the official experiments. What began as casual conversations over meals in the facility's cafeteria soon evolved into longer, more personal interactions. One evening, as they walked through a small garden within the compound, a concession to the need for outdoor spaces in the otherwise tightly controlled environment, Pia introduced Russell to a Talarian fruit called zinca. The small, iridescent berries were a delicacy on her world, rarely shared with off-worlders. As Russell bit into one, he was surprised by the burst of flavor on his tongue. It was unlike anything he'd tasted before, sweet, tangy, with an underlying warmth that seemed to spread through his entire body. "This is incredible," he said, reaching for another. "I've never tasted anything like it." Pia smiled, her skin glowing softly in the dim light. "It's a favorite of mine. I'm glad you enjoy it." As they continued to share the fruit, Russell began to feel an unusual sensation. His skin felt more sensitive, every brush of the evening breeze sending shivers through him. He noticed that Pia seemed affected as well, her normally controlled movements becoming more fluid, almost languid. Their eyes met, and suddenly the air between them seemed charged with energy. Without conscious thought, Russell reached out, his fingers lightly grazing Pia's arm. The contact sent a jolt through them both, far more intense than their previous interactions. Pia gasped, her skin erupting in a dazzling display of bioluminescence. "Russell," she breathed, her voice husky. I think the zinca is affecting us somehow." Before they could explore this unexpected development further, an alarm blared throughout the compound. They sprang apart, the moment shattered by the harsh sound. "Attention all personnel," a voice announced over the facility's communication system. "We have a security breach at the main gate. All non-essential staff, please report to your designated safe zones immediately." Russell's hand went to his communicator, already moving towards the main building. "Ambassador Chen, what's happening?" Chen's voice came through, tense and clipped. "We've got protesters at the gate, right? A lot of them. And they're led by someone you might remember, Vorkax." As Russell and Pia hurried inside, they could hear the distant sounds of an angry crowd. The relative peace they had enjoyed since arriving at the new facility was over. The true challenges of their groundbreaking research were about to begin, and they would test the limits of both their scientific understanding and their growing personal connection. The facility buzzed with activity as security protocols engaged, and researchers scrambled to secure their work. In the midst of the chaos, Russell couldn't shake the lingering effects of the zinca fruit, nor the implications of their accidental discovery. As he watched Pia coordinate with the Talarian security team, her skin still shimmering from their interrupted moment, he knew that their journey into the unknown had only just begun. As the adrenaline from their escape faded, Russell found himself grappling with an unexpected development. Pia's skin began to pulse with an intensity he had never seen before. her bioluminescence shifting through a mesmerizing array of colors. She stumbled, her breathing labored. "Russell," she gasped, her eyes wide with confusion and a hint of fear. Something's happening to me." Before he could respond, Dr. Voss was at their side, her expression a mix of concern and scientific curiosity. "We need to get her to the medical bay immediately," she ordered, already activating her comm device. This could be a delayed reaction to the pheromone dispersal. Within minutes, they were rushing Pia through the corridors of the secure facility. Russell watched helplessly as she was placed on a bio-bed, surrounded by a flurry of human and Talarian medical staff. Dr. Zinlor's normally stoic features were creased with worry as he examined the readings on the medical scanners. "This is unprecedented," he muttered, his eyes darting between the displays and Pia's writhing form. "Her endocrine system is in overdrive. It appears she's entering an accelerated mating cycle." The words hit Russell like a physical blow. He knew from his research that Talarian mating cycles were intensely private affairs, rarely discussed with outsiders. For Pia to be experiencing one now, seemingly triggered by their shared pheromone exposure, was beyond anything they had anticipated. Ambassador Chen entered the medical bay, her face grim. "We need to contain this situation," she said, her voice low and urgent. "If word gets out about what's happening here, it could spark a diplomatic incident." As if on cue, alarms began to blare throughout the facility. Captain Holt's voice came over the comm system, tense and clipped. "We've got a situation at the main gate. A crowd is gathering, led by Vorkax. They're demanding to know what's happening with Pia." Russell's mind raced. How had news spread so quickly? He looked at Pia, her skin now pulsing with an otherworldly glow, and realized the magnitude of what they were facing. Dr. Voss stepped forward, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "We need to quarantine Pia and Russell immediately. If her pheromones are as potent as I suspect, we can't risk further exposure." Ambassador Chen nodded sharply. "Do it. I'll handle the diplomatic fallout." As medical staff began to prepare an isolation chamber, Russell felt a hand on his arm. He turned to see Dr. Zinlor, the Talarian scientist's eyes filled with a mixture of scientific fascination and deep concern. "Mr. Wright," he said softly, "I need you to understand the gravity of this situation. What's happening to Pia? It's never been documented in our species. The combination of human biochemistry and our pheromones appears to have triggered something we don't fully comprehend." Russell swallowed hard, his gaze drawn back to Pia. Her eyes met his, filled with a primal intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. He could feel something stirring within himself as well, a response to her condition that both thrilled and terrified him. "What do you need me to do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Voss approached, her expression grave. "We need to monitor both of you closely. Your prolonged exposure to Pia's pheromones may have triggered changes in your own physiology. We're stepping into unknown territory here, Russell. The implications for both our species could be enormous." As they were ushered into the isolation chamber, Russell could hear the distant sounds of the growing crowd outside. The air felt charged with tension and possibility. He looked at Pia, her alien beauty now transformed into something even more otherworldly, and knew that nothing would ever be the same. The door to the isolation chamber sealed with a hiss, cutting them off from the outside world. Inside, the air was thick with the sweet, intoxicating scent of Pia's pheromones. Russell felt his senses sharpening, his skin tingling with heightened sensitivity. Dr. Voss's voice came through the intercom, steady and professional, despite the unprecedented situation. "We're going to begin a series of tests to understand what's happening to both of you. Try to remain calm and report any unusual sensations or changes you experience." As medical drones began to circle them, taking readings and samples, Russell reached out and took Pia's hand. Her skin was hot to the touch, pulsing with an inner light that seemed to resonate with his very being. Their eyes met, and in that moment, Russell knew they were on the brink of a discovery that would change the course of human-Talarian relations forever. Outside the isolation chamber, the facility buzzed with frantic activity. Scientists pored over data, security personnel reinforced defenses, and diplomats engaged in heated discussions. But within their sealed environment, Russell and Pia existed in a world of their own, bound together by forces they were only beginning to understand. As Pia's mating cycle intensified, Russell felt himself changing in response. His senses seemed to sharpen, his strength increasing. He could feel a deep instinctive connection forming between them, transcending the boundaries of their different species. Dr. Chen's team of Earth geneticists arrived, adding their expertise to the growing pool of knowledge. As they worked tirelessly to unravel the mysteries of Pia's condition and its effects on Russell, the implications of their findings began to ripple outward. In the corridors of power on both Earth and Teleria, leaders grappled with the potential consequences of this unexpected development. The prospect of enhanced human-Telerian compatibility raised tantalizing possibilities for closer alliance and cooperation, but it also stoked fears of cultural contamination and loss of identity. As Russell and Pia navigated the intense physiological and emotional changes they were experiencing, they remained unaware of the larger forces their unique bond had set in motion. The true test of their connection and its impact on both their worlds was only just beginning. As Russell and Pia existed in their isolated world, the situation outside the chamber rapidly spiraled into chaos. The potent mixture of synthesized pheromones and Pia's natural emissions began to seep through the facility's ventilation system, affecting everyone inside in unexpected ways. Dr. Voss, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted the controls on a monitoring device, turned to Ambassador Chen with wide eyes. "The pheromone levels are off the charts. We need to stabilize them before—" Her words were cut off by a sudden cacophony of alarms. Screens throughout the lab flickered and distorted, displaying nonsensical data. Outside, the distant chants of protesters grew louder. "The Harmony Seekers," Chen muttered, peering out a window at the growing crowd. "They must have caught wind of what's happening here." Inside the isolation chamber, Russell's senses sharpened to an almost painful degree. He could hear the frantic heartbeats of the medical staff outside, smell the acrid tang of fear mixed with the sweet scent of Pia's pheromones. His muscles tensed, filled with an energy he'd never experienced before. Pia writhed on the biobed, her skin pulsing with increasingly complex patterns of light. "Russell," she gasped, reaching out to him. "I can feel everything." As their hands connected, a surge of energy passed between them. The chamber's lights flickered, and the monitoring equipment emitted a high-pitched whine. Outside, Dr. Zinlor stumbled, catching himself on a nearby console. "By the first ones," he breathed, his normally stoic features contorted in a mix of awe and concern. "Their biochemical compatibility, it's affecting the facility's system somehow." Major Diana Reeves burst into the lab, her uniform disheveled and her expression grim. "We've got a situation. Vorkax and his followers have breached the outer perimeter. They're demanding access to Pia." Chen's comm device crackled to life, Captain Holt's voice tense and clipped. "Ambassador, we can't hold them back much longer. What are your orders?" For a moment Chen hesitated, the weight of the decision visible in her eyes. Then she straightened, her voice firm as she addressed the room. "We need to contain this situation now. Dr. Voss, work on stabilizing the pheromone levels. Major Reeves, assist with security. Dr. Zinlor, contact your government. We need Telerian backup." As the team sprang into action, Russell felt a surge of clarity cut through the chaos of sensations bombarding him. He turned to Pia, whose eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. "We need to help," he said, surprised by the strength in his own voice. Pia nodded, her movements fluid and purposeful despite her condition. "Together," she replied, her voice resonating with harmonics that sent shivers down Russell's spine. They moved as one, approaching the chamber's sealed door. Russell placed his hand on the control panel, and to his amazement, the door hissed open. The pheromone-laden air rushed out, enveloping the lab in a visible mist. Dr. Voss turned, her eyes widening in shock. "How did you—" But Russell was already moving, his enhanced senses guiding him through the chaos. He could perceive the layout of the entire facility, aware of every person's location, every system's status. "The ventilation system," he called out. "We can use it to our advantage." As Russell outlined his plan, Major Reeves nodded approvingly. "It could work, but we'll need to act fast." Outside, the situation grew more tense. The Harmony Seekers' peaceful demonstration had drawn media attention. their cameras capturing the growing confrontation between Vorkax's followers and the facility's security forces. Suddenly, a new voice cut through the chaos. "Let me through! I must see Pia!" Dr. Lyernax pushed his way through the crowd, accompanied by a team of Talarian medical specialists. They carried strange, pulsating devices that seemed to resonate with the pheromone-charged atmosphere. As the newcomers entered the facility, the air grew thick with competing scents and energies. Russell felt his head swim, but he pushed through the disorientation. He had a plan to execute. Working with Major Reeves and Dr. Voss, Russell began to manipulate the facility's ventilation system. They directed concentrated bursts of pheromones towards the areas where Vorkax's followers had infiltrated. The effect was almost immediate. The intruders stumbled, their movements becoming uncoordinated. Some sank to the ground, overwhelmed by the potent cocktail of chemicals. As the immediate threat subsided, a new challenge emerged. The prolonged exposure to the intense pheromone mixture began to affect the human members of the research team in unpredictable ways. Dr. Chen clutched her head, her eyes unfocused. "I can see, patterns, connections I never noticed before." Others reported similar experiences, heightened senses, accelerated thought processes, even hints of cellular regeneration. The implications were staggering, but there was no time to fully process them. Zianek arrived amidst the chaos, his imposing figure cutting through the crowd. As he entered the pheromone-saturated facility, his body went rigid. A low, resonant hum emanated from him, causing the nearby equipment to vibrate in sympathy. Dr. Zinalor approached his colleague cautiously. "Zianek, are you all right?" The Talarian scientist's eyes snapped open, glowing with an inner light reminiscent of Pia's bioluminescence. "I remember," he whispered. "Ancestral memories, awakening." As the situation in the facility teetered on the brink of complete chaos, Russell felt a new surge of energy course through him. He turned to Pia, whose body was now a dazzling display of light and color. Their eyes met, and in that moment, they both knew what needed to be done. Together, they began to move through the facility, their combined presence seeming to calm the frenetic energy around them. The pheromone levels began to stabilize, and the affected humans and Talarians started to regain their composure. But even as order began to return, Russell could sense that this was just the beginning. The events of the day had set in motion changes that would reshape the future of both species. As he looked at Pia, her alien beauty now transformed into something even more extraordinary, he knew that their journey into the unknown was not nearly finished. Over. The true test of their connection and its impact on both their worlds was only just beginning. In the days following the crisis at the medical facility, Russell and Pia found themselves at the center of a whirlwind of activity. The Talarian government, in conjunction with Earth's diplomatic corps, had swiftly approved the construction of a new research complex on the outskirts of the Talarian capital. As they were transported to this state-of-the-art facility, Russell marveled at the speed with which it had been erected. "The Interspecies Compatibility Research Center," Dr. Voss explained as they approached the gleaming structure. "It's been designed specifically to continue our studies while ensuring your safety and comfort." Russell felt Pia's hand tighten around his own. Their connection had only grown stronger since the incident, and he could sense her mix of excitement and apprehension without her needing to speak a word. As they entered the facility, they were greeted by a familiar face. Dr. Zinlor stood waiting, his usually stoic expression softened by a hint of curiosity. "Welcome," he said, gesturing towards a corridor lined with advanced monitoring equipment. "We have much to explore." The following weeks were a blur of tests and experiments. Russell found himself constantly amazed by the changes in his own body. During a physical assessment, he effortlessly lifted weights that would have been impossible for him before. In sensory tests, he could discern minute details in images and sounds that even the most advanced Talarian technology struggled to capture. Pia, too, was evolving. Her bioluminescent patterns had become more complex, shifting in ways that seemed to convey entire concepts in a single flash. During one memorable session, she solved a series of advanced mathematical problems faster than the facility's quantum computers. But it was their connection to each other that truly captivated the research team. Dr. Voss monitored their brainwave patterns as Russell and Pia sat in separate rooms, their eyes closed in concentration. "Remarkable," Dr. Voss murmured, watching the synchronized spikes on her display. "They're communicating on a level we've never seen before. It's almost telepathic," Dr. Zinlor finished, his eyes wide with wonder. Outside the ICRC, the ripples of their unique bond were spreading. News feeds showed footage of Harmony Seekers gatherings in major Talarian cities. Humans and Talarians stood side by side, their faces alight with hope as they chanted slogans of unity and cooperation. One evening, as Russell and Pia relaxed in their private quarters, a familiar face appeared on the video screen. Zianek, looking both excited and troubled, addressed them directly. "I hope this message finds you well," he began. "I wanted to inform you that I've decided to undergo a series of tests myself. The experience during the crisis, it awakened something in me, something ancient." As Zianek continued, explaining his theory about dormant genetic sequences, Russell felt a strange resonance within himself. He turned to Pia, seeing his own recognition mirrored in her luminescent eyes. Their shared moments of insight were becoming more frequent and profound. During a routine meditation session, Russell found himself swept into a vivid vision. He saw a bustling city where humans and Talarians moved together in perfect harmony, their technologies and cultures blended into something entirely new. When he emerged from the trance, he found Pia gazing at him intently. "You saw it too," she said. It wasn't a question. Dr. Voss and her team were fascinated by these shared experiences, equipping Russell and Pia with new devices to record and analyze their visions. "This could be the key to unlocking entirely new forms of communication," Dr. Voss explained, her excitement palpable. As the days passed, Russell became aware of a growing tension beneath the surface of their daily routines. He caught snippets of worried conversations between staff members, mentions of political pressures and security concerns. One afternoon, as he and Pia were testing a new communication device that translated her bioluminescent patterns into visual displays, an alarm blared through the facility. Major Reeves burst into the lab, her face grim. "We've received intelligence of a potential threat," she announced. "A group of extremists inspired by Vorkax's rhetoric. They've infiltrated key positions in the government and security forces." Russell felt a chill run down his spine, remembering the chaos of their last confrontation with Vorkax's followers. But this time, something was different. As he looked at Pia, he saw the same commitment in her eyes that he felt in his heart. Together they closed their eyes, reaching out with their enhanced senses. In that moment of shared consciousness, they perceived the complex web of intentions and actions surrounding them. They saw the threads of the coming conflict and knew with certainty that they had the power to change its course. As they opened their eyes, Russell and Pia exchanged a look of understanding. The true test of their bond and its impact on both their worlds was about to begin. Russell and Pia exchanged a determined look, their shared vision still fresh in their minds. Without hesitation, they reached for the communication panel and alerted the ICRC security team. "This is Russell Wright," he said, his voice steady. "We have reason to believe there's an imminent threat to the facility. Implement Security Protocol Alpha 7 immediately." Within moments, alarms blared throughout the complex. Major Reeves's voice came over the intercom, issuing rapid-fire orders. Security personnel rushed to their stations, and reinforced doors sealed off critical areas. As the facility transformed into a fortress, Russell closed his eyes, extending his heightened senses. He could perceive the subtle vibrations of footsteps, the faint electrical hum of security systems, and the quickened heartbeats of the staff. "There," he said, pointing to a schematic of the facility on a nearby screen. "The ventilation system on the east wing. It's a potential weak point." Major Reeves nodded, quickly dispatching a team to reinforce the area. "Good catch, Wright. What else can you tell us?" For the next hour, Russell worked closely with the security team, identifying vulnerabilities and suggesting improvements. His enhanced perception allowed him to spot potential issues that even the most advanced Talarian technology had missed. Meanwhile, in the main research lab, Dr. Voss and Dr. Zinlor huddled over a series of holographic displays, their expressions a mix of excitement and concern. "Look at these readings," Dr. Voss said, gesturing to a complex graph. The neural synchronization between Russell and Pia has stabilized at a level we've never seen before. They're maintaining a state of shared consciousness for extended periods. Dr. Zinlor's antennae twitched with interest. This could revolutionize our understanding of interspecies communication. We need to accelerate our research on neural synchronization immediately. As the scientists delved deeper into their findings, Major Reeves pulled Russell aside, her face grim. "Right, I have some information you need to see." She handed him a data pad, its screen filled with classified documents. Russell's eyes widened as he scrolled through the files. "The Chimera project? General Stark's been running covert operations this whole time?" Major Reeves nodded. "I've been gathering evidence for months. The potential misuse of this research, it could have catastrophic consequences." Russell's mind raced, processing the implications. "We need to involve Ambassador Chen. This requires immediate diplomatic action." As Russell moved to contact the ambassador, a series of power fluctuations rippled through the facility. Lights flickered, and several communication terminals went dark. "Something's wrong," Pia said, her bioluminescent patterns flashing with urgency. "I can sense disturbances, malevolent intentions." Russell closed his eyes, syncing his consciousness with Pia's. Together, they extended their awareness throughout the facility. They perceived flashes of movement in restricted areas, the acrid scent of burning circuitry, and a pervasive sense of wrongness. "Infiltrators," Russell said, his eyes snapping open. "They're already inside, sabotaging our systems." As security teams scrambled to locate the intruders, the main doors of the research wing hissed open. Zianek strode in, flanked by Dr. Lyernax and a contingent of Talarian officials. "High Counselor," Dr. Voss greeted, surprise evident in her voice. "We weren't expecting you." Zianek's eyes darted around the room, his pupils dilated. "The situation demanded my personal attention. He trailed off, his body swaying slightly. Dr. Lyernax stepped forward, concern etched on his features. "High Counselor, perhaps we should move to a more secure location. The pheromone levels here are quite elevated." As Zianek was led away, Russell and Pia exchanged a worried glance. They could sense the High Counselor's internal struggle, his neural patterns fluctuating wildly in response to the pheromone-rich environment. Outside the facility, a crowd had begun to gather. Harmony seekers, their faces painted with symbols of unity, chanted slogans of peace and cooperation. News drones hovered overhead, broadcasting the scene to millions across both worlds. Inside, Russell worked feverishly with Dr. Voss to modify their prototype communication device. "If we can calibrate it to detect the unique pheromone signatures of the infiltrators," he explained, "we might be able to track them down." As they fine-tuned the device, reports flooded in from around the facility. Staff members were exhibiting unusual behavior, forming spontaneous bonds with both humans and Talarians they had barely interacted with before. "It's the elevated pheromone levels," Dr. Zinlor theorized. "They're accelerating the bonding process we observed in Russell and Pia." Before they could fully process this development, alarms blared once again. Security cameras showed a group of armed infiltrators storming towards the central research lab. "They're after our data," Dr. Voss realized, her face pale. "If they destroy our samples and research—" Russell's teeth clenched. "They won't get the chance." He turned to Pia, their eyes meeting in silent communication. Together, they moved towards the lab's entrance, ready to face whatever came through those doors. As the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, Russell and Pia stood side by side, their enhanced senses alert to every subtle change in their environment. The prototype communication device hummed softly in Russell's hand, its display flickering with rapidly changing data. The lab's reinforced doors buckled under a powerful blast, and through the smoke and debris strode a tall, imposing Talarian. His bioluminescent patterns pulsed with anger and hatred. "Krelvox," Pia whispered, recognizing the former military officer from shared intelligence briefings. Krelvox's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the room, his gaze finally settling on Russell and Pia. "So," he growled, "you're the abominations they've been keeping here, the future of our species." His voice dripped with contempt. Russell stepped forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Krelvox, we don't have to fight. There's so much you don't understand about what's happening here. The Talarian's bioluminescent patterns flashed with derision. I understand plenty, human. Your kind seeks to corrupt us, to dilute our purity with your inferior genes. As Krellvox's followers spread out through the lab, Russell felt a surge of insight flow through his connection with Pia. In that moment, he saw flashes of the Talarian's past, the pain of lost comrades, the bitterness of defeat, the fear of a changing world. I know you've suffered, Russell said, his voice calm and empathetic. The conflicts of the past have left deep scars, but what we're doing here isn't about domination or corruption. It's about understanding, about finding common ground. Krellvox hesitated, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. Outside the lab, the chants of the Harmony Seekers grew louder, their energy seeming to permeate the very walls of the facility. Russell took a step closer, his hand extended. The future doesn't have to be a threat, Krellvox. It can be an opportunity for both our species to grow, to evolve together. As the tension in the room reached its peak, Russell and Pia shared a moment of perfect synchronization. Their combined consciousness expanded, touching the minds of everyone present, human, Talarian, and those caught in between. In that breathtaking instant, a wave of understanding swept through the lab. Krellvox stumbled back, his eyes wide with shock, as he experienced a glimpse of the profound connection between Russell and Pia. The infiltrators lowered their weapons, confusion and wonder replacing their earlier hostility. The prototype communication device in Russell's hand pulsed with a soft, harmonious light, translating the complex emotions and thoughts swirling through the room into patterns everyone could understand. As the moment of shared consciousness faded, Russell looked at Pia, then back to Krellvox. The Talarian's bioluminescent patterns had shifted, reflecting a tumult of conflicting emotions. This isn't possible, Krellvox murmured, his voice shaky. Russell took another step forward. It is possible, Krellvox, and it's just the beginning. The question is, are you willing to be part of it? The lab fell silent, the fate of human-Talarian relations hanging in the balance. Outside, the voices of the Harmony Seekers swelled, a chorus of hope rising above the chaos. Inside, Russell and Pia stood ready, their unprecedented bond a living testament to the potential that lay before them all. As the tension in the lab reached its peak, Russell and Pia exchanged a knowing glance. In that moment of shared consciousness, they understood what needed to be done. Russell took a deep breath, centering himself, while Pia's bioluminescent patterns shifted to a soothing rhythm. Together they focused their minds, tapping into the unique connection they shared. A subtle change rippled through the air, imperceptible to normal senses, but profoundly affecting everyone present. The humans in the room felt a wave of calm wash over them, their racing hearts slowing. The Talarians, including Krellvox and his followers, experienced a sudden shift in their bioluminescent patterns, mirroring the tranquil display emanating from Pia. Krellvox blinked, his aggressive stance faltering. What is this?" he asked, confusion replacing the anger in his voice. Russell took a careful step forward, his hand still raised in a non-threatening gesture. "It's understanding, Krellvox. We're showing you what we've discovered here, a way for our species to truly communicate." As Russell spoke, Pia moved towards the prototype communication device. Dr. Voss, catching on quickly, began adjusting its settings. The device hummed to life, its display flickering with a complex array of colors and patterns. "Your family," Russell said softly, the words coming to him through his connection with Pia. "They were hurt during an early encounter between our species, weren't they?" Krellvox's eyes widened in shock. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because we can sense it," Russell explained, gesturing to himself and Pia. "The pain you carry, the misunderstanding that led to that tragedy, we can feel it all." As they conversed, the prototype device began translating their emotional states into visual and auditory signals that both humans and Talarians could interpret. The lab filled with a symphony of light and sound, each pattern representing the complex interplay of feelings and thoughts swirling through the room. Outside, the chants of the Harmony Seekers shifted into a synchronized bioluminescent display. Led by a young Talarian named Zaralim, The group created a mesmerizing light show visible through the lab's windows. The combined effect of this external display and the internal emotional projection began to break down the barriers between the opposing factions. Zianek, who had been watching the scene unfold with growing fascination, suddenly gasped. His eyes unfocused, and his bioluminescent patterns erupted in a dazzling array of colors. I can see it," he whispered, awe evident in his voice. "The connection between you two, it's unlike anything I've ever experienced." The High Counselor staggered forward, his newfound perceptions overwhelming him. "This changes everything," he declared, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "As High Counselor of Teleria, I order an immediate ceasefire. We must study this phenomenon further." Krelvox, still reeling from the emotional onslaught, lowered his weapon. His followers, equally affected, followed suit. The tension in the room dissipated, replaced by a sense of wonder and curiosity. As the immediate threat subsided, Dr. Zinlor burst into the lab, his antennae twitching with excitement. "The data we've collected during this crisis, it's extraordinary," he exclaimed. "The heightened emotional states and pheromone levels have triggered a rapid activation of dormant genetic sequences in both humans and Talarians." Dr. Voss, her attention divided between the prototype device and Zinlor's announcement, nodded in agreement. "The effect is most pronounced in Russell and Pia. Their physiological changes are accelerating at an unprecedented rate." As if on cue, Russell felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. He stumbled, catching himself on a nearby console. Pia's bioluminescent patterns flickered erratically, her body trembling with the strain of rapid cellular changes. Dr. Learnax, who had been quietly observing from the sidelines, sprang into action. "We need to stabilize them immediately," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "I believe I can synthesize a compound using a combination of Talarian botanical extracts and human hormones. It should temporarily halt the transformation and buy us time for further research." As Learnax worked feverishly to prepare the stabilizing compound, the lab buzzed with activity. Scientists from both species collaborated, sharing data and insights with a newfound sense of purpose. The barriers that had once divided them seemed to melt away in the face of this unprecedented scientific breakthrough. Major Reeves, seizing the opportunity presented by the crisis, approached Zianek with a data pad. "High Counselor, there's something you need to see," she said, her voice low but firm. "Evidence of unauthorized experiments conducted by certain elements within Earth's military. The implications could be far-reaching for both our species." As Zianek reviewed the information, his expression grew grave. The revelation of the Chimera project added a new layer of complexity to an already volatile situation. Meanwhile, Dr. Learnax returned with the stabilizing compound. He administered it to Russell and Pia, who immediately felt a sense of relief as their rapid physiological changes slowed to a manageable pace. Russell, his mind clearing, looked around the lab. The scene before him was one of controlled chaos. Scientists working frantically, security personnel standing down, and a group of former infiltrators now engaged in earnest conversation with their Talarian counterparts. As the immediate crisis subsided, Russell realized that this was just the beginning. The events that had unfolded in the ICRC would have far-reaching consequences for both humans and Talarians. He turned to Pia, their eyes meeting in a moment of shared understanding. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, a living bridge between two worlds on the brink of a new era. Era of understanding and cooperation. As the immediate crisis at the ICRC subsided, Russell and Pia found themselves thrust into the spotlight as living symbols of human Talarian unity. Their unprecedented connection had not only averted a potentially disastrous conflict, but had also opened up new possibilities for interspecies relations. In the weeks that followed, Russell and Pia were approached by representatives from both Earth and Talaria with a unique proposal, a galactic tour to promote cooperation between their peoples. The couple exchanged a knowing glance, their shared consciousness allowing them to communicate without words. They both understood the importance of this mission and agreed to undertake it. Their first stop was Earth, where Russell eagerly introduced Pia to the rich tapestry of human culture. As they traveled across continents, Pia marveled at the diversity of landscapes, cuisines, and traditions. Her bioluminescent patterns danced with excitement as she experienced each new sensation. During their journey, they received an invitation to visit a remote hot spring resort nestled in a secluded mountain range. The resort, known for its mineral-rich waters, had recently opened its doors to Talarian visitors as part of a cultural exchange program. As they arrived at the resort, Russell noticed a subtle change in Pia's bioluminescent patterns. The colors seemed more vibrant, the pulses more intense. Curious, they decided to investigate further. Stepping into the steaming waters, Pia gasped. "Russell, this feels incredible," she said, her voice filled with wonder. Her entire body began to glow with an intensity Russell had never seen before. Russell waded closer, drawn by the mesmerizing display. As he reached out to touch Pia's arm, a jolt of sensation passed between them. Their shared empathic connection, already strong, suddenly intensified, tenfold. "It's the minerals in the water," Russell realized, his scientific mind racing. "They're interacting with your bioluminescent biology in a unique way." Pia nodded, her eyes wide with amazement. "And when you touch me, it's like every nerve ending is alive with pleasure." Their discovery led to a night of intense physical intimacy, their bodies glowing in synchronization as they explored this new facet of their relationship. The experience left them both breathless and exhilarated, their bond stronger than ever. News of their discovery spread rapidly through both human and Talarian communities. Soon the hot spring resort became a popular destination for interspecies couples seeking to deepen their connections. The sight of humans and Talarians relaxing together in the glowing waters became a powerful symbol of the growing harmony between their species. Returning to Talaria, Russell and Pia threw themselves into their work with renewed vigor. They collaborated closely with Dr. Voss and Dr. Zinn-Lor to refine their techniques for inducing shared consciousness. Through a series of carefully designed experiments, they developed a set of meditation and touch-based exercises that allowed other human Talarian pairs to achieve a similar level of connection. "Focus on your partner's energy," Pia instructed a group of couples during one of their workshops. "Let your consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of your own body." Russell added, "Remember, it's not about losing yourself in the other person. It's about creating a shared space where both individuals can coexist and communicate on a deeper level." As the couples practiced, the lab filled with a soft glow of synchronized bioluminescent patterns. The air hummed with the energy of newfound understanding and intimacy. These methods were quickly incorporated into cultural exchange programs across both worlds. Diplomats, scientists, and ordinary citizens alike benefited from the improved communication and empathy fostered by these techniques. As their galactic tour neared its conclusion, Russell and Pia found themselves standing on a balcony overlooking a bustling Talarian city. The skyline was dotted with a mix of traditional Talarian architecture and new human-inspired structures, a visual representation of the growing cooperation between their species. Russell turned to Pia, his heart swelling with emotion. "We've come so far," he said softly, "but I feel like this is just the beginning." Pia's bioluminescent patterns pulsed in agreement. "There's still so much more we can do together," she replied, her hand finding his. In that moment, they both knew it was time to take their relationship to the next level. Their decision to marry wasn't just a personal choice, but a statement to both their worlds about the future they envisioned. The ceremony that followed was a beautiful blend of human and Talarian traditions. As Russell and Pia exchanged vows, their bodies glowed with synchronized patterns that needed no translation. The event, broadcast across both Earth and Talaria, marked a historic moment in interspecies relations. In the years that followed, Russell and Pia channeled their energy into establishing the Interspecies Harmony Institute. The organization quickly became a beacon of cooperation, offering programs that combined the best of both cultures. One afternoon, as they oversaw a class on human massage techniques and Talarian bioluminescent communication, Russell couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. Students of both species worked together seamlessly, their bodies glowing with shared understanding. Pia, sensing his thoughts through their ever-present connection, smiled. "We've only just begun," she said, her eyes shining with excitement for the future they were building together.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.